Grüßt euch und willkommen zu dem nächsten Video in meiner Serie Grammatik-Wiederholung. Heute sprechen wir über Konjunktiv II, the subjunctive. These are the woulda, coulda, shouldas, and they are super useful, so listen up. Here we go. Los geht's. So the way that you know that something is in subjunctive is by comparing it to the indicative. Indicative is when you're talking about real, factual things, things that are actually happening, like Ich gehe heute Abend ins Kino, which is actually not happening, but if it were, Ich gehe heute Abend ins Kino, this Ich gehe here is I am going, I go, I do go. All of the different meanings that Ich gehe could have, I am going, I do go, I will go. It could have the future here just because heute Abend is in there. Of course, you could also say Ich werde gehen, and just I go. But all of these, it's actually happening, right? But in the next examples here, I'm not actually going to the movies. There are situations that are hypothetical or uncertain or potential or implausible or contrary to fact. Things maybe that are even possible, but you're not saying that they're actually happening. Then you know it's Konjunktiv II or subjunctive. So zum Beispiel, ich würde ins Kino gehen, aber ich habe zu viel zu tun. Am I actually going to the movies? No, I actually have a lot to do or too much to do. Ich würde ins Kino gehen, I would go to the movies, but I have too much to do. So with each of these, think, okay, what does that verb or those verb combinations mean? So ich ginge ins Kino, aber ich habe zu viel zu tun. Now looking at this one, you might think that looks kind of like the simple past. I went to the movies. But ich ginge is actually the Konjunktiv II form of the verb gehe. So ich ginge is I would go. So actually ich würde gehen und ich ginge are the same thing. The next one, wenn ich nur ins Kino gehen könnte. So wenn here is if. Obviously wenn can be when or whenever, but also if. So wenn ich nur ins Kino gehen könnte. And we see könnte here. Can I actually go to the movies? No, I'm saying if only I could go to the movies. Der nächste hier ist, wenn ich nur ins Kino gegangen wäre. Okay, this one gets a little bit more complex. This is actually what the perfect looks like in Konjunktiv. So if I had actually gone to the movies, I would say ich bin ins Kino gegangen. But with Konjunktiv II, I didn't actually go, so I changed ich bin to ich wäre ins Kino gegangen. I would have gone. It sounds like I would be gone, but I would have gone is the way we would say it in English here. So if only I had gone. The next one, du tust, als wenn du verhungern würdest. So you're doing or you're acting as if you would starve. So you're acting like you were starving. And you can also use Konjunktiv II to express polite wishes, requests, and suggestions. Now, we do this in English too. You might rather say, I would like something versus just I want it. So, ich möchte eine Karte nach München bitte. I would like a ticket to Munich, please. Würden Sie mir bitte noch ein Glas Wasser bringen? Sounds better than bring mir ein Glas Wasser. Instead of a command, you're saying, would you please bring it to me? And then, könntest du mir bitte helfen? You could say, hilf mir, help me, if it were really an emergency or something, but if you're trying to sound polite, you could say, könntest du mir helfen? Could you please help me? Okay, so how do you actually form the Konjunktiv II? Usually, most commonly, with the vast majority of verbs, you're just going to use the verb würde in second position and an infinitive last. Obviously, würde would be in second position if that's where the conjugated verb goes, and it could be kicked to the end and follows all of our typical verb rules that we've learned in previous videos before. But that's going to be your conjugated verb, and then infinitive is going to go last. Now, there are a couple situations where you don't want to do this. You do not want to use würde with haben. Instead of ich würde haben, we're going to see the verb hätte. You wouldn't use it with sein, so you wouldn't say es würde sein or ich würde sein. You would instead say ich wäre. And you also wouldn't want to use it with the modal verbs. Each of the modal verbs actually has their own Konjunktiv II form, and that's what you use with those. But with all other verbs, you're going to use würde, and würde takes your weak simple past endings. So you can use it with wishes. For instance, ich würde gern, I would gladly. So ich würde gern gehen, I would gladly go, or I would like to go. Suggestions. An deiner Stelle würde ich, that's in your position, I could say, an deiner Stelle würde ich mit dem Professor sprechen. You could use it with hypotheses, like if-then things. So if this were the case, it would be something. So, wenn ich mehr Geld hätte, würde ich nach Hawaii fliegen. So we see ich würde fliegen, I would fly. Now notice right here we have that hätte I was talking about. So we don't see würde haben here, we see hätte. If I had more money, I would fly to Hawaii. And here, wenn das der Fall wäre, würden wir es schon sehen. So we see wir würden sehen, we would see it. And we see the wäre here being used as well. If that were the case, we would already see it. Polite requests, you could say würden Sie bitte. So for instance, würden Sie mir bitte den Salz reichen? Would you please pass me the salt? Okay, so if you're not using the würde construction, then you actually can just use the Konjunktiv II form of the verb. Now I mentioned that you always have to do this with haben, sein, and the modal verbs. So you don't ever get to say würde with those. But there's some strong verbs, so verbs that have irregularities, that you can actually use either way, like we saw with gehen, where I said in one sentence, ich würde ins Kino gehen, and then in the next sentence I gave the example, ich ginge ins Kino. So würde gehen works for I would go, or ginge works for I would go. So some of the strong verbs, especially in formal written German, are used in their Konjunktiv II form instead of with würde, but some of them are used in speech as well. And then with weak verbs, it's very seldom used, so we're not really going to talk about that much because it's just really kind of rare to do that, and it just makes more sense to use würden. So let's start by looking at our modal verbs, okay? Now, our modal verbs, the way that you form the Konjunktiv II form is you go to the simple past form of the modal verb and then you add an umlaut. So mögen is to like, and we want to turn it into would like. So we go to the simple past, which would be mochte, and then we add an umlaut and we have möchte. So was möchten Sie trinken? What would you like to drink? Let's look at müssen. Müssen, we're going to go to the simple past, which is musste, without the umlaut. We're going to add the umlaut back in and have ich müsste Thomas das Auto verkaufen. I would have to sell Thomas the car. Können, go to the simple past, we have konnte, and then add the umlaut back in, and we have du könntest mit uns nach Berlin reisen. Dürfen, if you think of what the simple past would be, it would be durfte, but we've got to go back to that original stem. So we have dürfte nicht an den Strand fahren. He wouldn't be allowed to drive to the beach. Sollen actually has the same stem. It doesn't have a stem change, so we just go to the simple past form and it's the same. So du solltest Tom auch darüber fragen. You would be supposed to also ask Tom about that. And wollen, same thing. There's not a stem change here, so it actually looks just like the simple past. Ich wollte meine Hausaufgaben machen, wenn. So I would want to do my homework if. All right, so that's how the modal verbs work. Okay, so with our strong verbs, when we want to use these in the Konjunktiv II form, what we're going to do is actually look at their simple past form, which generally for strong verbs is always going to have a stem change in it. And then to get to the Konjunktiv II form, we're going to add an umlaut if the root vowel is an A, O, or U, and then we're going to add a weak past ending to that, because strong verbs would usually have different endings in the simple past. So that way the forms are not confused. They look different from the simple past, but they're just based on them. So commonly used strong verbs in Konjunktiv II, and remember with all of these, we're adding the idea that it would be the case, or that it would something. So wäre comes from sein, as we've seen up here. Sein is to be. Well, if we go to the simple past, we have war, and then we add the umlaut and the weak past endings, and we have wäre. And so wäre is would be. Now I have an asterisk here because you can't use the würde construction with this. You can't say es würde sein, it would be. You have to say es wäre or ich wäre. Haben is the same way. You go to the simple past form of hatte, had, and then you add the umlaut and the weak past endings. You've got hätte. Now I've got a second asterisk here just to remind you that haben in the simple past does take weak past endings. It's treated like a weak verb. But in the Konjunktiv II, it works the same way as these others. Finden, you would go to fand, found, and then add the umlaut in the ending. You have fände for would find. Wissen, to know, go to wusste, knew, then add the umlaut in the weak past ending, and you have wüsste, would know. Geben, to give, go to gab, gave, and then add the umlaut in the e, you have gebe, would give. Gehen, we've seen already in the example at the beginning. So gehen, if you wanted to say I went, it would be ging, and then would go would be ginge. Kommen, to come, goes to kam, came, and then you add the umlaut in the ending and you get käme, would come. So here's ein paar Beispiele. So with sein, wäre glücklicher, wenn wir ihm helfen würden. He would be happier if we would help him. Haben, wir hätten Zeit aufzuräumen, wenn wir nicht so viel arbeiten müssten. So we would have time to clean up if we didn't have to work so much. And here we see that müssten. There's that form of if we didn't have to work so much, because it's not actually true. We do have to work that much. Kommen. Ich käme auch mit, aber ich kann nicht. So I would also come along, but I can't. Now, weak verbs, I'm just going to make a quick mention of this. They're less commonly used in their Konjunktiv II verb form because they're the exact same as a simple past form. So I could say, arbeitete heute, wenn nicht krank wäre. He would work today if he weren't sick. But arbeitete heute could also mean he worked today. So it's kind of confusing, and the context is really important. And so usually what people do is, if it's a weak verb and it's going to look the exact same as a simple past, they're not going to use the Konjunktiv II form of the verb. They're just going to use würde. They're going to say, würde heute arbeiten, wenn nicht krank wäre. And that way, it's not confusing. Okay, so what about perfect with Konjunktiv II? What about using Konjunktiv II in the past tense? Well, first thing to point out is Konjunktiv II only works in perfect in the past tense. You can't do a simple past with this. There just isn't a form for it. So that actually helps us out, because in the perfect we know we're using haben or sein with a past participle. So when you're trying to do the Konjunktiv II, instead of just saying like haben or sein with your past participle, you're going to say hätten or wären with your past participle, respectively. So whichever of the verbs would go with your past participle, you'll pick that one that corresponds to it. So the rules are the same. Just like you would use sein if it were like motion from point A to point B, or a change of state, or a change of condition. Then you would have to use sein, but with everything else you'd use haben. Same thing in the Konjunktiv II. So with modal verbs used alone, you're going to use their past participle. But with modal verbs used with infinitives, you're going to end up with a double infinitive. They're the ones that are a little bit tricky to use. We prefer generally when we're talking with modal verbs to just use the simple past, but you can't do it in the Konjunktiv II, so you end up sometimes having double infinitives. All right, so here's an Beispiele. So think about what you would fill in here. With gegessen, if you're saying someone ate something, would you use haben or sein? Well, you'd use haben. So if you were saying he actually ate the cake by himself, you'd say hat den Kuchen alleine gegessen. But he didn't eat the cake alone. We're saying he would have eaten the cake alone. So we'll say hätte den Kuchen alleine gegessen. He would have eaten. Okay, the next one. Hingegangen. With gehen, gegangen, would we be using haben or sein? We would use sein because we have motion from one place to another, change of location. So we're going to use hättest here. Hättest du wirklich? Oops, sorry, I said hättest. I meant wärest. Wärest du wirklich hingegangen? So, because that's our form of, that matches sein, our Konjunktiv II form of sein. So, wärest du wirklich hingegangen? Would you have really gone? Now, notice in English, I still say would have gone because we only use have when we're in the perfect. But in German, they use have or be. So that's why we've got that little bit of a difference in translation. Here, gemocht. Okay, this comes from mögen, the modal verb to like. So if I wanted to say you wouldn't have liked it, then what am I going to use with gemocht? Well, what would I use if I were saying that you didn't like it? Haben or sein. I would use haben. So here we have du hättest den Film nicht gemocht. Now here we're bringing in a modal verb with an infinitive. If I wanted to say I could spend money, I'd say ich könnte Geld sparen. But if I wanted to say I could have spent money, then you're going to wind up with this double infinitive form. Da hätte ich Geld sparen können. So there, I could have saved money. And we see this would have, and really it's like would have been able to save, but both of them in German are infinitive. The way that you know the order to put them in is that this modal verb originally would have been second and it got kicked to the very end. So that's how you can kind of keep those straight. Now, the times when it gets really tricky is like in this next example here. Du wusstest, so you knew, this is indicative here, du wusstest, dass ich da Geld hätte sparen können und hast trotzdem nichts gesagt. So this is you knew that I could have saved money and still didn't say anything. So this is pretty complex here. When you wind up, the reason that this one is kind of funny looking is that we think das, okay, that's a verb kicker. Shouldn't it kick hätte all the way to the end of the clause and be here, sparen können hätte? Well, there's a special rule when you already have a double infinitive and you're kicking your conjugated verb to the end, the conjugated verb ends up falling right in front of the double infinitive. Now, this doesn't happen super often, but it does come up sometimes. For now, it's pretty complex. As long as you can understand it, you'll get it over time as you continue your German studies. Now, this last one, wenn ich das gewusst, what would we use with wissen? Would we use haben or sein? Well, we'd use haben. So we're going to use hätte here. And then gesagt, well, which one would we use? Haben or sein? We use haben. So we're going to use hätte again. Wenn ich das gewusst hätte, hätte ich doch etwas gesagt. If I had known, or if I would have known, I would have said something. So if I had known, I would have said something. Das ist alles für heute. So danke für das Zuschauen und schauen Sie mein nächstes Video. Grammatik-Wiederholung, Reflexivverben und Pronomen. Tschüss alle!